All right, so this is Preston Stewart. He is a brilliant YouTuber who has a very war-centered, military-centered YouTube channel. Preston Stewart. He's a West Point grad, an officer, a smart guy, a good YouTuber, and he put this out just a few hours ago about the hardware and the, I guess, the thinking behind a strike on Iran. Let's take a look.
That's Axios reporting last night what most of us are seeing, that it is looking more and more like war with Iran is imminent. I mean, this is the largest buildup of U.S. military forces in the Middle East in decades, significantly larger than recent operations against Venezuela or even last year's strikes on Iran, Operation Midnight Hammer. So today we're going to talk about what is happening right now, as well as some arguments being made for and against U.S. military action in Iran. And I want to start with the scale of this buildup. Ian Ellis over on X does an incredible job documenting what is publicly known in terms of U.S. military assets in the region. And you should look at this chart, which I think Ian's going to have to make this a two-pager before too long. It's getting awfully small on there. But, I mean, it gives you an idea of how much is headed to the region. But this is just what is public. And just in the last few hours, we've already got more information that American F-22s have left the United States en route to the Middle East. The last time that they were used during Operation Midnight Hammer, they arrived in theater 4 days before those strikes were carried out, something to keep back of mind. Additionally, there is a non-stop flow of supply and logistics aircraft, be it cargo planes or refuelers, heading from around the world, mostly the United States and Europe, into the Middle East right now. The buildup there has not stopped. It is continuing. And there's nothing like this that I can remember. All right, so the last time that we had anything near this size happening in the Middle East was late 2002 into early 2003, the lead up to the eventual invasion of Iraq. Just to give you an idea. Now, one notable piece that's missing, if we're going to make that comparison from now to 2003, is the boots on ground. There's nowhere near the same quantity of U.S. military, Marines, and soldiers on the ground that would take part in any sort of land invasion of Iran. So everything that we're looking at right now speaks to an air campaign. In fact,
okay, and this is a very important point, right? Which is we're talking about an air campaign or a sea-based air campaign. But the boots on the ground, if there's needed for that, well, you have Israel, and you also have the Iranian people. And that's what everybody's counting on, the Iranian people to be part of this boots on the ground, the Iranian people themselves, the Iranian resistance, shall we call them, okay? They're the other boots on the ground. So it's not about invading Iraq here. It's about toppling a regime and hoping that the locals will do the job of taking over. I don't know if there's a great plan, but a very good point that Preston is making, which is it's not a boots on the ground operation that's being prepared for.
We've got a couple different analysts here suggesting that this could be a rather sustained campaign at that. But the buildup here, we know that one carrier strike group is already in theater. There's another set to arrive in the next couple days, maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Each of those have their own associated carrier air wing that includes F-35s and F-18s. There's as many as 12 destroyers already in the region. And then when you're looking at land-based aircraft, I'm hesitant to even give numbers here because this is changing by the day. But let's just, to keep it simple, say we have a number of F-35s, F-15s, F-16s, and A-10s already forward deployed in the Middle East, and even more in Europe that could, and some are, being moved forward into areas where they can carry out strikes on Iran. Now, in terms of what's happening right now, kind of the backdrop is that talks are ongoing around something, depends on the day, generally the Iranian nuclear program. And it looks very similar to how these talks have played out in the past. The pessimistic side of me says this isn't going.
All right, so our friend Preston here did a great job in laying out the armament that's on the ground. Now he's talking about the politics. Now I want to hear Preston's analysis of what Trump is thinking, what the negotiations, the efforts to make peace, the board of peace, all these elements are doing. Oh, by the way, it just dawned on me. It just dawned on me right now that the board of peace gathering together right now is basically an international legitimacy for Trump to act. I didn't think about that. I know it sounds kind of obvious right now, but now the piece I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Now it pieced together. You're putting together a board of peace to be like a lot of folks that instead of a security council, if that's not working, right? Because you have China, you have Russia on the Security Council. So instead, you have all these players in the Security Council that are going to not agree to your plan. Now you've got this other alternative legitimization mechanism that gives you an international support green light to do the thing that you're doing. Now it adds up to me. You have an alternative board of peace. That's pretty creative, you must say. You have to give the Trump team that creativity, right? So you have this alternative board of peace, alternative to the UN, gives them legitimacy, a lot of armament to strike, and now the world is going to say with him, go ahead and do what you think is right because the board of peace backs you. I don't need the Security Council to agree with me.
Going anywhere, and I think there's some folks that would agree with that. What we've heard most recently is that the two sides have agreed to keep talking, which is kind of diplomatic talk for no progress made. Let's see if we can get closer next time around. And when you look at the list of demands from the United States and what Iran has said they are or are not willing to talk about, again, it's just hard to see how there's any room for progress there. So to nobody's surprise, doesn't appear to be a lot of progress at this point. And Axios overnight reported, quote, the Trump administration is closer to a major war in the Middle East than most Americans.
Okay, so not surprisingly, the point of what Preston is saying is that the negotiations haven't led anywhere. Surprise! Negotiations with the Iranians haven't led anywhere. Surprise! I mean, we knew that it was not going to lead anywhere. You're not going to talk them into submission. You're not going to negotiate with these guys into submission. And Trump said so. He's like, they never win wars, but they never lose a negotiation. A great and true line. And so Axios is reporting that it's moving closer to a major war with Iran. We have to remember that Iran uses proxies, but it might very well be that Iran is a proxy for China, right? For Israel, Iran is the head of the octopus, but for Trump, Iran is a tentacle of China, who has empowered Iran and empowers all things that are anti-West. So there is a different calculus here for President Trump.
Americans realize it could begin very soon. A U.S. military option in Iran would likely be a massive weeks-long campaign that would look more like full-fledged war than last month's pinpoint operation in Venezuela. The sources note that it would likely be a joint U.S.-Israeli campaign much broader in scope and more existential to the Iranian regime than the Israeli-led 12-day war last June. The Times of Israel had a write-up on this as well, where they quoted former IDF military intelligence chief Amos Yadlin saying that a military confrontation between the United States and Iran could begin in the coming days and be an intensive, multi-week campaign. He said the confrontation could be imminent. Quote, last week I allowed myself to fly to the Munich Security Conference. I would think twice about flying abroad from Israel this weekend. He says, we're much closer than we were before, but I remind you, a superpower does not go to war in a matter of days. There is a diplomatic path that must be exhausted. Adding that many people still do oppose the attack, and we're going to look at some of those assessments here in just a moment. He also said that the Pentagon is not clear what they want to achieve. They quote two Israeli officials that Israel is preparing for a war to break out within days, adding that Israel is pushing an operation aimed at toppling the regime. Now, a couple thoughts there. That piece kind of flying under the radar a little.
Israel is pushing this thing because of a global danger. But again, I want you just to consider what I'm saying here to you, which is that, one, the Iranians spat in the face of Trump. Never underestimate the power of personal politics, right? Never underestimate that Trump does not want his name tarnished so rudely in the international arena. It undermines his conflict with China. It sullies his name. He doesn't want to go down on record as being spat on in the face by the Iranians. No, he does not. So the Israel has, what Israel really has here more than anything is intelligence. That's what it is. Intelligence and a bank of targets. The bank of targets that's been developed by Israel. Israel says this is what they're doing, this is what they're doing, this. Israel has top level intelligence on Iranian moves that America doesn't have. The intelligence agency that's supplying the Americans with information is Israel. That's what Israel's really doing here. Sure, Israel's got an opinion, but the fact that the Iranians spat in the face of Trump and the fact that Iran is actually a tentacle of China, that's what's driving President Trump, I think.
But I think now this is a former IDF intelligence chief. So, I'm certain he has a lot of contacts throughout the United States and throughout Israel. I would be surprised if he is spun up day to day on the current status of U.S. plans related to Iran. So when he says the Pentagon is not clear on what they want to achieve, he probably did not just get off a briefing from Secretary Hegseth about the war aims that we're trying to pursue. That said, it's not shocking if I were to hear that the Pentagon is still trying to figure out exactly what the goal is here, because we have seen what looks like a bit of a shift in the dynamics over the course of the last couple of months. When the protests kicked off, and more on that here in a second, when the protests kicked off, President Trump was mainly focused on that. Don't go after the protesters. We're going to protect the protesters. Help is on the way, right? And when those strikes didn't occur, we saw a bit of a shift to kind of re-engaging on the nuclear question. So, and regime change doesn't seem to have come up hardly at all in official U.S. circles. So what is the Pentagon goal here? It's a good question. I don't know that there's a clear public assessment or public knowledge of that. The Atlantic Council said first, this is a unique moment to reshape the Middle East. And they argue what I've argued recently, that the Iranian regime is arguably the weakest now than they have been since their formation in 1979. So if we want to pursue U.S. policy in the Middle East and kind of have a say in what happens with Iran now and into the future, great time to take advantage of that. The second they point to is the moral imperative. I do think there's some value here.
All right, so one is that Iran is weak, so this may very well be the best time to strike at Iran. Two, moral imperative. Okay, there's definitely a moral imperative, but there's other moral imperatives in this world. As I said, I think there's also personal politics involved here, which is probably the biggest, more personal imperative than a moral imperative. Although I think there's probably moral feelings here as well. I think the thing about the moral thing is, it's not that it's moral to attack Iran. It's that it's probably immoral to leave them empowered, because these guys are capable of such evil. If they're willing to kill 50,000 of their own people, they're willing to do who knows what in this world. Somebody said, and then my mom told me that it's already been discussed a lot in the internet, is that really this is the old Persian Greek wars that lasted for a long time. Here's somebody who's an anti, writes, Donald is the Zio puppet president. Okay, well, I doubt that that's what really is. I think what we're talking about is a sense of global danger and of a Chinese arm and of something that supplies China with the energy, cheap energy. So I think there are reasons that are not Zio. By the way, I just want you to know, parentheses, using terms like Zio, Zionist, if you call me a Zio, I'm like, that's all righto with me. You're not using a bad word when you say the word Zionist. I just want you to know that. Like, Zionist is a nice word. It's like he's good, he's goody, he's really good. Like, there's nothing, the word Zionist, there's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't hurt my feelings when you use the word Zionist or even Zio. It just means loves Zion, Jerusalem. So I'm only too happy to be painted with that brush. All right, let's keep going. Let's see what the other reasons for a war with Iran right now are.
Unfortunately, I don't think this plays very much into the calculations at this point. This is talking about coming to help the Iranian people after they tried standing up to the regime. The third is the credibility dilemma, and they point to Obama's red line in Syria. I actually think this plays a pretty significant role here. So Obama in Syria, don't use chemical weapons. Assad used chemical weapons. The United States didn't do anything. That's an event regularly pointed to from analysts in the United States and elsewhere, saying the United States doesn't follow up on their promises. Even the Trump administration, senior officials within this administration have pointed to that as a sign of kind of American weakness and not willing to do what is necessary. So that might actually carry more weight than it appears. The fourth one here is an interesting one, talking about the economic stakes at play for the United States and China, saying on the one hand, we could reintegrate massive energy reserves here in Iran back into the Western market. At the same time, by cutting off China's access to cheap oil in Venezuela and now Iran, that could put China in a situation where maybe they have to rethink any sort of full-scale conflict in the Taiwan Strait. Fifth is
that was it. That was his whole take on China. I think it's much bigger than that. I think it's much bigger than that. I think that China China getting cheap energy is huge. It's a humongous thing. It means that they have the ability to continue to operate, and they have almost like an endless energy supply that's cheap. It puts them at a great advantage. So that's number one. I like that point here, and I'm surprised that he put this as like such a small point. This is the big thing that Trump is facing. He's not facing Iran. Iran's a nuisance. Iran is an awful murderer. Iran gave him the finger. But the real player here is China. And that's why, according to one news report that I saw, there's Chinese ships in the sea as well. And that's the other thing. I really wish I could see what the other deployment is. I don't know what the other deployment is. We need to say the other side's deployment. And as we've learned on the show, never take the other side too lightly. We have to take the other side seriously, and we cannot make fun of the Iranians or the Turks or the Russians or the North Koreans, or the Iranians certainly, and not the Chinese. You got to take them seriously. They're here to play the 100-year marathon to get rid of the shame that they feel has been heaped upon them in the 20th century. And they want to be not only a seat at the table, they want to be the dominant power economically and militarily. And that, to me, is also that's to me the biggest factor in this potential blow up that's happening that we're really getting ready for here. Let's get back to Preston.
Is very similar to the first, talking about needing skin in the game. Iran's future is going to change at some point in the future. We've talked about their future is going to change at some point in the future. You like that? We've talked before about Khamenei's old. He's like 86, 87 years old at this point. He's clearly not going to be around that much longer. There's going to be a change. And if we want to play a role in what the future of Iran looks like, this could be the time for the United States to get involved and, quote, put skin in the game to help dictate what the future looks like. The last piece here talks about the Iranian nuclear program, and this is another one that I think might hold some weight within the Trump administration. They point to President Trump's constant statements about how Iran will not have a nuclear program and saying, look, you hit it, you set it back, no doubt, but by all accounts, Iran has not stopped their nuclear program and has not changed their intention to pursue a nuclear program. So negotiations aren't going to do it. Military might be the option. Now, there's a couple other insights here kind of from the other camp, right? Of people saying this is not going to be as easy as you think. It's not going to be simple. It's going to be drawn out. And there's a reason that a lot of regional countries right now are shutting off airspace, and you cannot overfly, say the United Arab Emirates. You cannot overfly Qatar, and their concern of what this could actually look like. The National Interest put out a piece titled How a U.S.-Iran Clash Could Spiral Out of Control, where they say the Islamic Republic does not believe it can win a conventional war against the United States. Its strategy, therefore, is not outright victory, but cost imposition, what might be described as seeking an honorable defeat by making the price of an ongoing war unacceptably high for the United States and therefore persuading Washington to reach a quick settlement. That is really smart. I don't know what to say. You hate to see it when our adversaries come up with good strategies and pursue good strategies. The Iranian proxy strategy was pretty effective by all accounts. I mean, it's pretty degraded at this point, but it did its job in a lot of ways. And this is another one where Iran going toe-to-toe with the U.S. military would be great for the U.S. military. Pretty rapid victory in that sense. It's not comparable. Our capabilities to theirs is not close. So Iran is likely to pursue something else. And what cost will the United States accept for a victory in Iran? That's something to think about. I don't know. Something tells me it's not very high, though. Again, the fact that this argument is not being made to the American people, if you walk down the street and say how many ships, how many sailors, how many aircraft are you willing to lose for, again, what we don't know to be the desired outcome in Iran, my guess is that number is pretty low. And the American appetite for casualties in this conflict is on the low end. Personal assessment, but that's something to consider.
I just want to say that Preston should consider that having, God forbid, casualties and having a real conflict is actually extremely good for a nation, in the sense that in this world, we have to have battle hardened troops. We have to have a military that's actually capable of being a military. And the problem is a lot of militaries in this world train, but they don't have actual combat. If you listen to books on war and stuff, they're always talking about battle hardened troops. You need battle hardened troops, and the Americans need to be battle hardened in a world that has a China, a Russia, an Iran, a North Korea. You got to be tough, and so the nation has to be tough. In fact, it could be that one of the blessings of this potential conflict, this upcoming conflict, would be actually conflict, because America, in order to retain any kind of hegemony, needs to show that it knows how to have conflict and how to actually fight. It has all this weaponry, but is it useless, or does America know how to actually project strength and use it? And that would be actually tremendously healthy for a generation of Americans that need a purpose, need a cause, need to understand what life is really about, need to get out of the captagons and the depressions and the what do you call it, the various prescription drug abuse, all that kind of stuff, and pot dispensaries and all those things, and like to remember that there is a purpose in this world, and we have a mission, and that mission is to rid the world of evil and to protect the world for liberty. I think that when you talk about having a very low tolerance for casualties, well, the jihadis certainly have a much higher tolerance, and to defeat them, you have to face them, and you have to face them with ability to actually fight a war, and not just to to drive a huge aircraft carrier, but really to be squeamish. Those two things don't work.
Add that the Trump administration's gunboat diplomacy to secure a nuclear deal is widely interpreted in Tehran not as leverage, but as part of its preparation for a regime change operation. Crucially, if Iranian leaders conclude that this is Washington's ultimate objective, they're far more likely to approach any confrontation as a fight for survival rather than a limited exchange akin to the 12-Day War. Under such conditions, Tehran would be inclined to employ its capabilities early before they are degraded by sustained airstrikes. This is one of the minute, we are arguably already in this category, but you get to this area where it's very, very hard to walk it back. If Iran gets the hint that we are inbound for strikes, you can understand the rational thinking of, we need to use those missiles right now against the most viable targets right now, because they might not be here tomorrow. But if those aircraft were not actually inbound for a strike, all of a sudden we see this escalation starting that is very, very hard to unwind, because the minute that Iranian missiles are in the air, you better believe that Israel, and depending on the targets, right? But I would assume that some of those targets would be in Israel. You better believe that Israel is going to begin retaliatory strikes, and the United States, with the firepower we have in the region, likely doing so as well. Now, Iran International takes a different angle here, talking about why regional powers are pushing to prevent this war. They say from Riyadh to Ankara and Doha, governments across the Middle East have moved with unusual urgency to contain the confrontation. Their motives are not driven by abstract appeals for peace, but by hard calculation. War between Iran and the United States would expose their territory, economies, and political stability to immediate risk. They say this emerging consensus reflects a simple conclusion shaped by a decade of upheaval. A controlled crisis can be managed, a war cannot. Again, going back.
I think that is just a lot of verbiage. Why do the Arabs not want U.S. to have war with Iran? One is because they don't want to see the West defeat jihadism, even if it's jihadism that they don't like. That's number one. Number two, they don't want oil prices to drop. And number three, and this is the biggest one of them all, I know this is going to sound funny. You know what they don't want? They don't want the biggest victor of this whole thing to be Israel. They don't want to see a big, happy, shiny Israel being rid of its big enemy. There's some place in every Arab country's heart that they're like, most Arab countries' heart, that they're like, well, let the jihad get the Jews. The Jews are annoying, and let's destroy Israel. Somewhere inside, they still have that dream, and Iran is the last to hold out that dream in any capable, in any serious way. And so there are various reasons. The Turks, they don't want Israel to prosper through this. They rather have, remember, the Turks are for Hezbollah, for Hamas, and so is the Iranians. They have places where they agree, and they don't want to see American hegemony. They don't want to see Israel being a local power. And, another, Saudi Arabia is probably afraid of oil prices dropping. There are other reasons why they don't want to see a conflict, and they're probably scared on some level as well. But I think that in their heart, they harbor that they don't want the end of the jihadist war against Israel and against the West. That's my guess as to why the Arab and Muslim countries, like the Arab countries, but then also Turkey and other countries are kind of coalescing against this war. Maybe.
Back to the previous article talking about how quickly this could spiral. If you're talking about low intensity conflict, U.S. in Iraq is probably a pretty decent example, right? That by and large was contained to only happening in Iraq. There were second and third order effects, no doubt, but missiles flying across territory, aircraft flying from Qatar into Iranian airspace is a very, very different war. They say most of these states maintain closer ties with Washington than with Tehran, yet their opposition to war is rooted less in sympathy for Iran than their own vulnerability. Across the region, governments face a difficult reality. They depend on the United States for security while remaining exposed to Iran's missiles, drones, and allied militias. This dual vulnerability explains their approach. They oppose war and are working to prevent it, but also preparing for the possibility that diplomacy fails. If war breaks out, most would seek to avoid direct involvement while quietly aligning with Washington's security framework to protect their territory and long-term interests. I think that's probably a safe assessment, that last part there. It'd be hard to imagine that the missiles start flying and all of a sudden you've got Turkey and Qatar saying, well, actually, we're going to back the Iranians on this one. That's not really in the cards at all, but it would be nice if we were going into a conflict and had all of the regional allies not just secretly backing us and willing to back us at the end of the day, or maybe not go against us, but actually supporting U.S. operations. That would be, of course, ideal here.
Well, one of the regional players, and the most significant one, is of course Israel, right? And that's what I was saying. Like even the way Preston Stewart is talking, he's talking about the Arabs. He wants the Arabs and the Muslims to be in the American side. You would think that Saudi Arabia would be there, but I think their leadership is weak and divided inside. I wouldn't doubt that the UAE and the whole UAE is pro-America, pro-Israel striking, and Qatar is anti-Israel, anti-America, and jihadists. So even if they're Sunni and Iran is Shia, they still don't want to see the jihad go down, even though it's their enemy jihad. They still believe. I think that they would rather have the other jihadi, even though they might do war with the other jihadi, but they prefer that than to seeing Israel and America win this one, right? And remember, Israel's got a vested interest. I want to make it clear. Israel's got an interest to get rid of Iran, the Iranian regime, and to liberate the Iranian people. And I think that Trump sees Iran as a tentacle of China. That's how I think of it. And I think there's a calculus here. And I think there's also the personal affront. I think he thinks to himself, if these guys, and remember the old world, it's useful to go back to Roman times when you're thinking about this stuff. When a country rebels against the hegemon, the empire sends its troops to fight it. And I think that's what happened here. I think that Trump is trying to create a world order, and these guys stepped out of line, and now he has a chance to teach them a lesson, China a lesson, and to control oil, and to support his allies, and to have a strengthening Trumpian empire, right? And so that's what I think is really happening here.
Al Jazeera then had an interesting piece that I wanted to highlight, talking about, from their opinion, why Trump is hesitating to carry out strikes on Iran. And the reason I wanted to point...
I don't know if he's hesitating. I just don't know if that's true. I think he's preparing. I'm not sure there's hesitation here. I'm not sure. It doesn't look to me like hesitation. It looks to me like shock and awe preparation.
This one out is we have had the assets in theater for a long time. All right, this is one of those where I've been hesitant to make this video because it's been the same for like weeks now, right? We had the ability to carry out strikes right when the protests kicked off. They would have been limited in scope, no doubt, but we had the ability to do something. Every week since then, now every day, even every hour, we have more and more assets in the region. And at some point within the last probably week to 10 days, we crossed the threshold to where this is the largest that we've seen in decades. So something right now.
And that by itself is something on its own, right? Like quantity has a quality all on its own. And the fact that there's so much assets here, again, back to that quote from the Hunt for Red October, right? Back to that quote is like that itself is likely to start a war. Just the fact that there's so much war machine ready and trained to fight, right? I mean trained, I mean like ready to trained on the target.
President Trump from pushing that button to go. It might just be a matter of timing. Al Jazeera has a different approach here, where they say Washington is not hesitant because it lacks overwhelming military capability. Far from it. It has hesitated because in the case of Iran, power does not translate into speed, and speed is the currency Trump values most. Iran has spent decades preparing not to win quickly, but ensuring that any conflict with its adversaries becomes drawn out and costly. Its strategy is not centered on territorial conquest or flashy tactical successes. Instead, it is built on endurance and the imposition of costs. Iran does not aim for a knockout blow. It seeks to draw its enemies into prolonged conflicts that drain their resources, erode political capital, and consume time, ultimately exhausting even the most powerful militaries. Again,
I just want you to know as a point of order, anything that Al Jazeera writes, anything, it's always spin. It's always spin. And the only good thing I could say about that is that whenever you hear Al Jazeera, see Al Jazeera, then you can say to yourself, what's the spin? And therefore I understand better what the Qataris want. So if they're saying that Trump is hesitating, it's probably because they want to draw a picture of Trump hesitating. And they're trying to give you all kinds of language to kind of show Trump as weak, and they give a lot of accolades to Iran. I think that they're jihadists. I think that they want the American power to shrink in this world. I think they're on the axis of Iran, China, North Korea, Russia. I think Qatar is part of that axis. And that doesn't mean they're all best friends. They're not BFF over there in evil axis land. But I think that Al Jazeera article is there to tell you how they want to portray Trump and this upcoming war.
And smart strategy, right? I mean, we've seen just about every military operation that President Trump has greenlit has been very fast, but effective, but very fast. I mean, I don't think that he's signed off on anything at this point that bogs us down for any significant period of time. The closest you could come to with that is the continued strikes with the Houthis. And do you remember where that ended? We just stopped. It was like at one point we were like, all right, ceasefire, moving on home. Like, we inflicted a lot of damage on the Houthis, no doubt. Lost a couple aircraft in the process. No U.S. service members were killed or seriously wounded, but we can't really call what we did to the Houthis a victory. We just stopped at one point. So that's probably the best indication of what a long-term campaign could look like, is the United States just kind of backing out. Again, I don't know that we have the stomach for a long-term fight in the Middle East right now. I don't know that argument has been made to the American people that we're ready to saddle up and get after it in Iran or in Iran
and that's a very good point that Preston Stewart is making here, which is are the American people the Iranian people have a lot of motivation to get rid of their corrupt and murderous dictator leadership. Are the American people being given a good case as to why this war is important for them? I agree with that. Preston is saying something which is true. I'm not sure that President Trump has made a domestic case for American conflict and Americans entering a Middle East conflict. And there's tons of people that are saying, look, Israel's dragging us into another war. I think it's notice that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not saying, America, we need you to come to war. He's letting President Trump do his thing. He's talking about just about Israel striking against the enemy. But the point there that a case needs to be made to the American people, I think that is an important point. And I wonder, and this leads me to another very important point, which is that this also might have something to do with the midterms, right? You have a midterms coming up. You want to show President Trump wants to show a powerful leadership in a pathway, and therefore get Republicans to be elected in the midterms. And maybe he says to himself, this is my last chance. But more likely, I think what he's really saying is, this is my chance to show and project power also back to my own people. Let's see if there's going to be more rhetoric that makes sense to the American constituents and shows them, why American might is right, and therefore why you should vote for Republicans in the midterms. That's also probably a player in the decision-making right now.
In Yemen. Al Jazeera says, quote, this is precisely why the United States remains hesitant and why Donald Trump in particular treads carefully. Trump is a gambler, but he's not suicidal. He's willing to roll the dice when he believes that the odds are stacked in his favor and the payout is immediate. Iran, however, represents a different reality, a conflict with enormous downside, limited upside, and almost no plausible path to decisive resolution and no assurance of a clean victory. Now, one thing we get caught in the trap of doing here is looking at the size of the military buildup and kind of thinking that you got to use it or you're going to lose it. And that's not true. I mean, they can just fly back home tomorrow. It could be entirely a negotiating tactic. It's a costly negotiating tactic. But at the end of the day, moving military pieces around the world is, financially costs a lot of money. It's safer and even financially less costly than going to war. So entirely possible that that's what we're seeing right now. But look, this is a lot of metal, a lot of firepower moving into the region for it to go unutilized. All signs do point towards some sort of likely sustained campaign being carried out against Iran at some point in the near future. Again, a key date to watch here is this Thursday through Saturday window when the second carrier strike group is set to arrive in theater.
Okay, we want to really thank Preston Stewart for an excellent analysis of the preparations for war, the motivations for war. Really appreciate your excellent YouTube channel and your assessment.